Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us, and thanks for having me and the panel here to Spring Labs. We are going to delve into compliance a little bit more. We've talked a lot about artificial intelligence and how it's used in different back office and consumer-facing use cases, and now we're going to really look into compliance, what we're currently doing by way of using artificial intelligence in compliance processes. What are some of the hurdles, and where do we see artificial intelligence going in the use of the models and the systems in compliance? So let's start with you, Laurel. How are you seeing compliance automation in risk management now?
Thanks, Megan. I'm glad you asked me that question because I'm sure everyone wants to hear from the lawyer first, so I'm here for it. You know, I like to think about how I'm seeing it in terms of what are the problems that we're trying to solve. And so with the companies that I'm talking to, and when we think about enforcement risk, which is a lot of what I do compliance building, but also think about regulatory and criminal enforcement risk. We think about staffing, because if you look at every enforcement action over the last 5 years, certainly over the last 2 or 3 years, one of the key elements of it is that the staffing had problems. And so when we think about automation and AI, what people are looking to do is to address that to some extent. And so that's tricky, of course, because it's not so simple as, well, let's just bring in an AI tool and all of a sudden we don't need the 10 people we probably should have had before. But these are the kinds of things that I see the clients that I work with looking at, is where can I bring in that tool to leverage, to reduce the staffing needs, the costs, and what is the right place to put that in? And so I do a lot of work related to AML, BSA compliance, and we've heard some talk about this from other people today, and I'm sure the panel is going to address these types of issues. But obviously it's KYC, onboarding, customer due diligence, transaction monitoring, SAR reporting, essentially the entire life cycle of the regulatory requirements from the financial crime side of things and anti-fraud as well. But so what I think about on this question is how far we're coming in such a short period of time. And I don't mean to tap on anybody's guilty consciences out there if they have them, but there are still people today who are using very manual processes, spreadsheets, Google Docs, things like that to do their regulatory requirements, whether it may be certain types of onboarding or transaction monitoring. And so we're looking at like a lightning or light speed shift for some companies that are doing that level of compliance work with maybe too few staff, to trying to bridge that gap to very new technologies and do things much better, much faster with very few people.
Well, that's helpful to understand. And Matt, you're with Bridgeforce, so you work with a lot of banks. How are you seeing banks leverage artificial intelligence in a compliance automation fashion, or how are you doing it in-house?
Yeah, sure. So, when I think compliance automation, I think picking up on some of the speakers earlier today, where one of the themes, you have to really know your use case, right? And that's one of the advantages in these more regulated spots is quite often exactly what has to be done and what has to be avoided is pretty well documented. How you have to measure it is well done. And that's the foundation of being able to do these things. So our world's very narrow and deep. We focus within credit bureau furnishing and disputes. And so where we're leveraging AI is on helping in real time those dispute agents to be able to make sure that they can conduct that reasonable investigation, but doing it with greater robustness. This really is an all of the above thing where compared to the baseline of what human beings actually do, and that's one of the key things here, right? The baseline comparison can't be perfection. The baseline comparison is what actually happens today. And in a lot of these processes, like in credit bureau disputes where somebody is seeing at least dozens of these in a day, they might have attachments that are 100 pages deep. That human being is not reading through all those pages, right? And so the ability of AI to improve on the current state can be very significant. So, but it starts with really understanding those use cases. Then you can start to lean into how do I measure the current baseline and then improve that and break it into all of its steps. Because that's the other kind of key behind the scenes. But I'm sure we'll pick up more on that later.
Yeah, for sure. And Robert, you're with WebBank. How are you leveraging compliance automation now? What does that mean to you?
At WebBank, we're still fairly early in the entire process, and AI has evolved significantly. I know it's been around since the 80s in one form or another. If you were to look at the capabilities 3 years ago, very different from 2 years ago, very different from 12 months ago. What we're looking at is both a top-down and a bottom-up approach. From a top-down and enterprise level, what functions potentially could be not exactly replace the individual, but augment the individual. The purpose of that is really to try to make sure that the results are consistent. When you have a manual process being performed by multiple different people, trying to get everyone to make the same decision in the same regulatory space is incredibly challenging. Then you layer on top of that the nuance of working with different companies, different vendors, different platforms. If you're not in the meeting to hear about it, you might not know the latest standard. So looking to apply it that way. From the bottom up, we're looking to try to replace, and I really appreciate in the last panel, the ability to review an 800-page board book or a 300-page committee book or a 700-page regulatory release. How can you absorb that? You can hand it to your assistant, have them review it, and then bring it back in front of you, in front of an expert that can look through it and say, yes, I see what you mean, but also, as was said, there are some trends that just weren't picked up on here. So trying to approach it from top down and bottom up. I look back, 25, 30 years ago, back when the help desk was there to explain how to turn a computer on. Anyone in the room here, everybody here knows how to do that. My grandson is 5. He doesn't use ChatGPT more than I do, but he will draw a picture and take a picture of it and have ChatGPT convert it into the Pokemon of his choice. He has mastered that. What is going to be here in 25 years? We won't be here. I won't be here. Everyone else here, of course, will be. I won't be here. How can we lay the ground so that it can iterate? I really appreciate that from an earlier session as well.
You know, something funny as I was preparing for this panel, I thought, I'll open it with a joke. That might be kind of good. So I go to ChatGPT, tell it about the audience, tell him who I am, and say, create a joke for me. The problem is I didn't understand the joke. I asked it again, create another one, and it still created a joke I did not understand. So I digress. I will not tell you the jokes because I don't get them. But Alec, how are you leveraging compliance automation? I know you've got a company that helps others with compliance, and what does this look like for you and your clients?
Yeah, so I think about it in 2 ways. So we make an agentic AI platform for banks. A lot of it's about security, but it's also about compliance, right? So the first thing is compliance of AI, right? There are all kinds of rules for banks. You got to make sure that if you're using AI, your consumer data is not leaking out somewhere. A lot of banks, especially the large banks, are adopting these frameworks. So the National Institute of Science and Technology has the AI risk management framework. We basically do full compliance with that from the word go, as an example. But then there's the flip side, which is AI for compliance, which I think is extremely promising. I think my advice there aligns with what Robert and other people were saying, which is you got to really do things in a narrow way, like spec out which things you're going to do, focus on those, and really have control over that. Because if all of a sudden you've got, rogue IT or rogue compliance officers like, I'm just going to do this with AI. Like, I'm not going to read that report or whatever. You could end up having a problem if it's not blessed and then somehow they're missing something. But I do think there are kind of 2 categories there. Robert, you were talking more about, hey, let's enhance what humans can do, which totally works. But there are also things that humans don't want to do. Like, I don't want to go through every cash deposit for the last month and look for structuring. But AI can do that, right? And do that really, really well. So I think there are kind of 2 categories there. and automation is definitely part of it. And then also there's the, my AI wakes up every day at 6 a.m., looks through my portfolio of companies, whether that's loans or a stock portfolio, whatever, reads newspapers in 18 languages, picks the top 3 stories, and then sends it to me. Like, that's pretty valuable too, right?
Megan, can I jump in and ask a question of the panel? Hate to do it, but hearing what everyone said, I mean, as we think about how we employ these new tools, what worries me from a sort of interfacing with a regulator or potential risk point of view is that we aren't just replacing process with process. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that there's great promise because some of these tasks are they're just painful, they're mind-numbing, they're not done well. There's great opportunity. But if we're just having the process repeated by AI rather than a human, that's no good, right? I mean, in your example, if AI is helping you distill what's the most important articles to read, then great. But one of the things that I'm trying to talk to the folks that I work with about is, what are you trying to solve for? What is your goal? And that's changing. And we have an administration now. I mean, we'll see what comes of it, but talks about reducing the burden of monitoring transactions, SAR filings, and that sort of thing. So the goal is that it's more meaningful information, actually useful to law enforcement, less of a burden, less of a check the box exercise. But I don't hear a lot of people sort of, and it takes time to get to that point, but like really thinking about, okay, what are we trying to do? What are the risks particular to my platform? Different from what might be, every other platform that's using this tool out of the box, and how am I customizing it to what would be a win in my circumstance? So I'm just curious, sorry for stealing, but whether, you have thoughts on how to do that.
I mean, that's why we come back to some of the earlier comments. It's all about really understand your use case. So let me dive deep for a moment. The narrow space of credit bureau disputes, right? Like, because people talk about AI as if it's one thing. Or they'll talk about choosing an AI tool as if, I'm going to choose this model family of its ChatGPT versus Grok. Let me get real for a moment, right? Like the agent, the AI agent assist tool my colleague showed here a few minutes ago over in the demo room, that's using 3 different language models behind the scenes, depending upon exactly what's going on. And that's in the spot where you're still having a human in the loop doing everything. When I look at, you start to have it take over and run and maybe let the AI complete it, we're probably looking at least 7 different language models that are all part of that in an integrated way, where you essentially have an org chart like you would in a human organization of 50 people. You have an org chart. You have the same thing with your use of AI tools. Some of you using large language models, some small language models, some using some calls out to databases, like very prescriptive, coming back to exactly what is it you have to achieve, what do you have to avoid, what's okay on the trade-offs. So now I can get the right combination of quality, speed, cost, right? So it is that devil in the details to make all this work. That's why when I hear people talk of sort of one AI tool or one platform, that doesn't make any more sense to me than saying, hey, I need to work on a car. Should I have a screwdriver or a wrench? No, you need them all, right? So, and it's about knowing what you're solving for and how you're going to put it together.
If I could bring in just a quick use case, I compare a lot of Gen AI ideas back to computer-assisted audit techniques from 20, 25 years ago, where when I started in my career, we would handwrite all of our work papers, and different colors meant different things. They had to be in a certain order. You had to close the book. You had to then walk that to the vault. That was replaced when you can get away from sample testing and do a population test. My absolute favorite population test I ever came up with, Gen AI I bet could do it more easily than I did, was I worked at a credit card bank, and I needed to know was the bank charging over-limit fees without authorization or an opt-in by the consumer. I could have sampled that all day long. The bank said, no, we don't charge those fees. So instead of sampling, I went to the general ledger and looked for a line, over-limit fees charged, over-limit fees refunded. My test was done. So very good point. It's not replace a process with a process. It's what is the objective? My objective was, how can I show that we are not charging fees? How can I do that cost effectively? Now, fast forward to today. We've recently launched an AI tool that's able to review marketing materials. In the past, we had 17 people reviewing 63 different products, and each product was marketed a different way. Rather than asking everyone to be aware of what are the laws and regs, what is the bank policy, what is our partner's policy, and what are the requirements of that product, we found that not every human can keep track of every piece of information. Things were missed. So in terms of what is the objective of this use of AI, it absolutely was not how can we reduce headcount. It was how can we have the process be consistently applied. It keeps our partners happy. It keeps the business line happy. It takes away some of that just manual redundancy. I remember at one point our company hired a single individual to help do this full time. They made it 2 months. I mean, how long would you last if you had to review marketing materials 8 hours a day, every day? So it was a great example of how can you make sure you identify what is the it you're trying to solve, not just AI can do all kinds of stuff. Well, great. I can do all kinds of stuff too, but I get paid for results. Know the results you want going into it, and absolutely make sure you measure it. I've been hearing ROI in so many of the sessions here. Make sure you know that going into it.
Yeah, so in your use case, you start with a known pain point that could be made better by a repeatable action that can then be determined by a human once it's done, right?
And it definitely helps with getting it sold to senior management too, because senior management knows it's a pain point, not just for the group doing it, but for the groups that are sending information in. They want it cheaper, faster, stronger, better.
And if I could pick up on your point, though, like if you're very clear on exactly what's that end objective, I think to have people's comfort, because let's be honest, there's a lot of change here. Lots of change makes people uncomfortable. So if you can lead with the point and demonstrate it of, look, objective number one, we're going to have higher quality out of this AI process than we had out without it, right? So objective number one is not taking out human beings. It's having better quality. But now doing that and understanding really well, how's that defined? What's good? What do I have to avoid, et cetera? I think what you'll quickly find is in a lot of these processes, humans aren't great. They get bored if you put me in that same job, right? And so you might find that by a year later, you're going, yes, I have better quality. Yes, this happens faster. Oh, and I need 80% less people for that particular function. I can put them in other places, right? But I think there can be a huge, but you have to lead with the quality and the deep understanding of exactly the process. The rest follows.
And when you have the added benefit of reducing risk.
Because if you improve the quality, you reduce the risk, right?
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So I'll turn to Alec for a second. So your platform works with a lot of heavily regulated companies. And we've heard, my goodness, I bet thousands of times today, the term artificial intelligence. And I know for different groups of people that can raise anxiety, and especially when we don't know exactly what we're talking about. To the point of you all here, you really have to come down to explaining what it is that you're trying to solve for. And in a regulated industry, you've got a lot of risk, right? You've got regulators that are really taking a close look, especially now. So how do you handle that with your platform? How do you handle the regulated and the high risk environment?
Yeah, great question. Well, right now, I think the regulators are focused kind of big picture on what's going on. Do you have an AI policy? Are you maybe following the NIST AI risk management framework? If you're not doing that, what are you doing? But what's starting to happen is we're starting to see these pretty detailed AI questionnaires go out from the regulators. We're talking 100, 150 questions. And if the answer is yes, we have an AI policy and no one's using AI, you're good. Like you're not going to have a whole lot of questions after that. But if you are doing anything with AI, the big focus right now appears to be, are you doing things on the investment or lending side? Are you communicating with customers with AI? And if you're doing that, that's just going to be very heavily scrutinized. They're not saying don't do it. In fact, you heard earlier today, yeah, we want you to use AI, create efficiency. That being said, there are really four things you got to think about. The first one is governance, right? Like, what is AI allowed to do? What's it not allowed to do? What are people allowed to do with AI? And also kind of firewalling off those use cases from different groups. In other words, the CFO's office probably has some AI that can look at books and records of the firm. The call center has AI to help them when a client calls up. They shouldn't have access to each other's AI, right? The second piece is around risk management. Now, a lot of that is around protection of your customer data, right? So that better be encrypted everywhere, per Graham Leach-Bliley, including in AI. Now, that's not always the case, right? So that's something you might want to audit and just make sure that's happening. That's something that we focus on a lot. There's also a lot of shadow AI or shadow IT at larger banks, meaning like, wow, I didn't know someone was using Perplexity at my bank. There's actually a bank in Texas that almost got fined $20 million because someone was uploading stuff to Perplexity and didn't realize they weren't supposed to upload consumer data to Perplexity. Oops. So the next part is obviously regulatory compliance. So if there are things you have to do from a compliance perspective, obviously just you have to do them. That maybe a regulator has come to you and said, you may or may not use AI to do something. That's probably unlikely right now unless you're a really big bank. But the main thing they keep saying over and over again is, look, just because it's AI doesn't mean the rules don't matter, right? If a human making a loan would have to not be biased, and you got to prove that your AI making a loan is not biased, right? So that's super important. And then finally, and I think that we've given a little bit of short shrift here today on this is cybersecurity around AI. Super important, right? So if I hack into a bank and I see that the user has Copilot available, what am I going to do? I'm going to say, oh, look through all my emails and find passwords that I might have, or show me my last email from the CEO. Or what databases do I have access to? Or I might try to exfiltrate data out into an Excel spreadsheet and then email it to myself outside the bank as a bad guy, right? So those are all things that we have to be concerned about. I mean, why are we encrypting customer databases? So the bad guys don't steal them, right? So these things are things that we focus on heavily at my company. And I think it's literally the top of the first inning in terms of cybersecurity specifically for AI.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think, it's been brought up a couple of times on different panels, but the use of a third-party developed artificial intelligence tool can create some of those risks. And we've seen from regulators that if you have an AI tool, and you're using that AI tool, you, the company, are still responsible for whatever you're using. And so, Alec and Matt, I'm curious, how do you handle questions from clients when they ask about how you're using AI or how you've developed it, or what are some of the safeguards that you're using now? Do you get those questions, and are people interested in documents, or how do you answer those questions?
Yeah, sure. I mean, of course, as we start to go into the space of people piloting using our AI tools, we get a ton of those questions. And honestly, some of the times when you see those 120 questionnaires, there's a fair amount of education that has to be done in the response. Because a lot of times the questions, people often don't know what questions to ask, right? So they've probably used an AI tool to help write some of it, and half their questions apply to this, half don't really, right? But yeah, so for us, when we first started getting into it, the very first thing was, hey, how do you do this while making sure you don't have data leak out, right? So that sort of InfoSec aspect of it. So that's, of course, where we start. In our case, we use the Bedrock platform through Amazon Web Services, really designed to enable how do you interface with these large language models or small language models while keeping the data in your VPC, right? So that's kind of foundational. You have to have that first. So that's in scope for our PCI and SOC 2 and all those sorts of things. And then beyond that is around the transparency of exactly how we're doing each of these various steps. And that, again, I know I sound like a broken record on coming back to the use cases, right? And so, because I think then as people go to look forward and trying to get more comfortable, it's about being able to answer that first layer of questions, but then that next derivative, which is if I understand the use cases, if I establish the baseline of what's existing human performance, then now it really becomes about the comparison and let data be your friend, right? Is the AI better than just the average human? 90th percentile? 99th percentile? What's the spot at which you start to say, you know what, I'm okay to let this run with some of these pieces?
Yeah, and we really focus a lot on compliance. I spend a lot of time with the regulators. So that's the first thing, and obviously all our clients are aware of that. So we start really, the foundation is NIST AI risk management framework and kind of go beyond that. The second thing that I think is important is we're actually deploying most of these models on-prem and in the bank's own private cloud. Like, we don't offer a SaaS solution that just dramatically reduces the risk. They don't even really need a SOC 2 from us because it's not our hardware, it's their hardware. And then finally, and this is actually really important, I should have mentioned it later, as part of compliance, there's certain things you have to keep records of. You need to keep emails for 8 years and loan documents for 10 and all that kind of fun stuff, right? Guess what? Like, you should actually keep the chats and all the information that AI is using. Now, you're probably required to do that for lending purposes and customer communication purposes, but how do you know which chats to keep and which not? So you just keep them all, right? And then you have a policy, an internal policy around when do they get deleted effectively, right? And then you can customize that based on, well, for the loan officers, we're keeping them for 7 years. If they're in the call center, it's a year or whatever, right? Super important, because the regulator comes in and says, what are people doing with AI? Or, by the way, since complaints is in the title of this session, if customers are complaining, hey, I got this weird email from AI, right, at your bank, like, you need to be able to prove it. You need an immutable record that shows what the AI sent out, not just like, yeah, not really sure what that sent the client. Yeah. Can you show us that email? I'm not really sure what that was. Yeah, that's not a great answer to a regulator.
If I can jump in, I mean, I can't agree more with what the points that Alec and Matt are bringing up here. I mean, the regulators, they're asking these questions. They're focused on data, sort of security, consumer information, and all that, but they haven't formulated their answers yet. But they know there's something here to watch out for. And I mean, I think of the number of times I've gotten on a call with a client who's had their AI assistant transcribe the meeting minutes, and I'll ask, well, you know, how are we maintaining the privilege over this conversation? Where is the record of this, the transcription of this conversation going? Who has access to it in the company? I mean, very, very basic, simple things. Well, really, usually what I say is, please turn that off. But once we get past that, I mean, the point is that these are very complicated issues. They're critically important, but very, very difficult. And what I'm seeing is that folks are not maybe appreciating the amount of time and legal resources needed internally to develop the policies around this stuff. And like anything that involves highly regulated activity, the best position to be in, whether the regulator might have agreed with you or not, is to have thought about it and documented it and have a policy, because the chances are they won't have a clear answer themselves. And if you've supplied them with one that's reasonable and it's in writing and it exists, they'll say, okay, this company has thought about it, they know what the issues are, they know what the risks are, they're addressing it, even if it's not 100% perfect. I don't need to get in there because I'm not afraid they have no idea what's happening here.
And super important, if you have an AI policy and a set of AI procedures, you actually have to follow them. Because the regulators will come in and actually read it and go, great, you do a quarterly report on what people are doing with AI. Can we get a copy of that? And if you weren't doing it, you're toast.
That's true, sadly. So number one, have a policy. Number two, follow it.
If I could just add one thing to that, I agree with everything you've said. I would only add one thing, and that is make sure that you can explain how it is that this is being generated. Not just it goes to this system and it outputs it. Just as you would need to know what does your vendor do? What are the inputs your vendor uses? How do they process that? How do they produce the item and then deliver it? The same thing with any Gen AI tool. If you can't explain it, it would be just like having a model used for your lending policy. If you can't explain that model, then the bank isn't the lender, the model is the lender, and the regulators will shut that down very quickly.
So I'm hearing a key word here, transparency. And you see it come up in a lot of laws proposed and enacted in automated decisions, in artificial intelligence, you name it. When I think regulators are having conversations around this type of technology, they want to make sure that you understand it and that you understand it enough that you can explain it to them. And so we've seen Utah and Colorado both have enacted laws. We'll see over the next year how those actually play out. But I think one of the key things that we're going to see, and that even California has right now, is transparency, and how clearly are you actually explaining what you're doing with artificial intelligence, and can you show them the results of that?
You're talking about in terms of to customers, not just to regulators, but to customers
And to customers as well,
disclosures
exactly,
Yeah. I mean, right, I think about New York, I mean, when it comes to virtual currency, issued, specific guidance, the expectation around disclosures, and also expectation that live human beings are doing things at the other end, are available during certain hours. So they're like on a far away from being sort of on board with AI as being the complete solution. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's a really good point.
Yeah, having clear notices is another thing. I mean, there's a whole lot of litigation in California regarding chatbots and whether or not consumers understood that they're engaging with artificial intelligence and not a real person. So, having clear disclosures on your chatbot, consent, all those different legal things can go a long way if they're drafted correctly. So we've talked a lot about what artificial intelligence can do for us in compliance automation. I'm curious, and anyone can jump in here, what are some things where we've seen artificial intelligence not quite be there yet in terms of sophistication, but maybe we'd like it to go there? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, the answer to that question, I'd say, has changed enormously over the last 12 months, right? So, like the use cases I'm talking about with disputes, we started putting a lot of energy into it almost 2 years ago. And at first, by, I'd say, end of summer of 2024, we had gotten to the spot of where I'd say we had gotten to the end of our first science project of going, this is really promising, it can do interesting stuff, it can't yet do it at the quality and repeatability that I would need to feel comfortable pushing this out, in a production way. And then, there were some new models, some new tools that were released fall of 2024, and then you could do better, and then do better. And then if I were to go back even 9 months ago, I'd say science experiment can work, but if you're going to have to process through this with the rigor that's needed, you can't make it, they're too expensive. Like my cost per tokens, the amount of thinking that has to happen to hit this all the different ways, it's not economic yet. And then by 6 months ago, I'm going, oh, no, that's different now. And so I think a year ago, the constraint was more the technology still. Now I think the constraint is often more around how carefully do people really understand their use case, what exactly has to be accomplished, what exactly has to be avoided, what are the things that have to be traded off on. I think that is more the constraint, because people have to understand that, well, it can't just be at the level of the PowerPoint. You get a few levels deep in it, then you can start to lay out exactly how this has to work to achieve those objectives.
I got two things for you. One is ChatGPT still can't help me solve Wordle every morning.
Or can it tell me a joke I understand?
Yeah, or tell a joke. But the other way more important one is actually some anti-fraud type stuff. So, for example, and this will just remain between us, but I was talking to a very senior person at a Fortune 500 consumer products company, and this person told me that their CFO got a video call from the CEO saying, we're doing a deal, I need to wire this money, there's a lot of money, we're talking a couple $100 million to this bank account, and CFO's all ready to go, then he's like, something was off. And he said, boss, you recommended a book to me yesterday. What was it? Not his boss. He was 5 minutes away from wiring $200 million out of the company, right? So that should never happen, right? It should never get to that point. And the same thing now, more to banks and call centers, is you can now fake anyone's voice with about 3 or 4 seconds of someone speaking. So, there are still large banks out there using voice prints as ID. Throw that out. That is total garbage at this point. But we're just going to see this accelerate, unfortunately. And AI is not good enough to detect AI fakes yet. Maybe a little bit, but not great. So that's just something we're all going to have to watch out for. And the anti-fraud stuff against AI is going to be super, super important over the next couple of years because the bad guys, as we heard earlier, are running as fast as they can. And this is how they make money.
You know, if I may, sorry to hop back into one other specific thing because you're saying what doesn't work. Asking one single AI agent to do too much doesn't work. And that's why implied, I realized in some of the discussion earlier, is knowing the use case, breaking it down. Because if you break it down into its pieces, you can get speed and reliability. If you don't, it will disappoint you, it will fail. Because AI will have a use case it's great at, and then very adjacent to it, a use case it's terrible at. And you have to be digging into that enough to be able to tell the difference. Sorry.
No, it may go exactly to that point. I mean, I think of something a little bit less dramatic than this very scary example, but more mundane maybe, but really important is SAR narrative drafting. It's a huge burden, huge time, a very obvious place where AI should be able to help. But I think one of the challenges is, I mean, to draft a SAR narrative, and it matters because, in fact, again, like staffing, these are my buzzwords, they show up in enforcement actions over and over again, certainly show up in examinations and exam findings and that sort of thing, SAR quality and all that. So, but the narrative is not just about summarizing information in one database, right? It's pulling from multiple databases, and many fintechs in particular, or newer, financial services companies of any kind, are the integration of the data may be complicated. You might have a very old-fashioned system here that's a case management tool. You may have a transaction monitoring tool. You may have crypto and non-crypto. They don't all talk to each other. So to me, it seems like that's an area where the AI is running up into some limitations because, yes, you could draft a narrative, but if the point is to integrate and collect the information and provide something useful and make sure, for instance, that you've incorporated all related activity and picked up on themes that may exist in multiple databases, that's a challenge.
Yeah, and in that example, you might find if you're using one agent to try to do all that, it will fail. But if you had a group of 7 agents organized properly, each with their own specific task, and a supervisor agent on all that happening, you might get the quality you're looking for. Like, it has to be broken down into the appropriate components to get the quality and speed you're looking for.
I agree. Just from a personal perspective, if I ask ChatGPT a question, often I have to go back and ask it again and again and again. An example I like to use when I do training at my bank or other conferences is one day I was sitting at home and I typed in, where can I get a good cheesesteak sandwich? And it listed Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, New York. It's like, no, I live in Salt Lake City, South Jordan. I want a cheesesteak for lunch today. Oh, yeah, something within 20 minutes. You can drive there, get it, come back. Getting down to the what are you asking it makes a huge difference. And it's a great example with using AI for multiple steps, multiple agents, assign each one a very distinct purpose. That way you can get to the end.
I mean, you also it seems also more dangerous in the sense that any one of those steps goes a little bit wrong. The whole is.
But the same thing's true with people. Yes. Right. If I have a 15-person team and one of them's not doing their job, right? So, but with AI, it's actually easier to monitor. And there's some best practices there. I mean, if I go techie for just a moment, like if I'm using one set of language models for my execution, use a whole different family for checking it because they each have their own biases. They embed their vectors differently. So like having that mix of things behind the scenes actually can greatly help get that confidence up.
Yeah, one of the things we haven't really talked very techie today, so I'll just mention one techie thing for the techies in the audience, and that is one of the big things that you've heard about is prompt engineering. So probably a lot of people have heard about prompt engineering. But there's also, it's called the meta prompt, or basically the instructions to the agent. And if you go back like a while ago, it'd be like, I'll put a couple sentences in, you're an expert in anti-money laundering or whatever. Now those prompts are multiple pages, and they're very, very detailed, and they really help get the best answer. So for your restaurant prompt, it could be, yo, I live in Salt Lake City. Like, find me a restaurant here, like not in Boston, right? But what's interesting now is we've built out for our clients an agent building agent, which will construct the prompt figure out which model will work best, all that cool stuff. So they're just sitting there going like, hey, guess what, Mom? I just built, an agent that does anti-money laundering in 5 minutes. So and obviously it's not done, but it gets you to the 95%, and then you've got to tune it or do the other work to get it to the higher level of acceptability.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, those input prompts used to be limited to a few sentences. A lot of your big models now, those input prompts could be the equivalent of several hundred pages. And you don't generally use all of that, but you might if you're using like RAG, retrieval augmented generation, and you're hitting your knowledge base. You're hitting some stuff that is like, in our case, things that we know are best practices, but then also that client's dispute procedures, all the outputs from data, rules related to it. Like you're pulling in a lot that goes into the prompt and breaking it down by which sort of component needs to handle it. That's your key to then getting the reliability. Because since you went techie, I'll go there for just a moment longer. You're swimming upstream trying to get certainty out of a probabilistic model. It sees everything in the form of distribution curves, and there is no distribution curve on the right answer of 2 + 2. It is a spike, one unique answer. And so that's why we have to give lots of instruction and break this down to get probabilities to come out with certainty. But done right, you can get some great results.
So from a regulatory defense perspective on all that, just make sure you know who your subject matter expert is what I'm thinking. It's like blockchain analytics. The regulators, the courts, whoever, are not going to dig in. They don't understand it. They just need someone they could trust. If you got multi-page prompts, you need to know who's going to be your explainer, which I think is a point you guys have made.
And with that, we are out of time. Thank you so much for being on the panel. You offer some really good tips and tricks. I think very helpful conversation. So thank you very much.